Good morning, Nico. How are you?
Good morning, Joe. I'm really fine. I'm really fine. I'm really excited to be here. I'm was looking forward to this for weeks, and yeah, didn't even know what will this day bring to me. But yeah, I'm happy to be here. How are you?
Yeah, really good. I'm really happy to be here. For people watching, a bit of context. So I met Nico on Clubhouse, which is makes me sound really modern, and I'm actually not. It was a bit of a serendipitous moment of meeting on a Clubhouse room, and Nico was explaining about his dissertation, his recent dissertation, and I just thought this is absolutely perfect to highlight this for our sustainability month with the aviation base. So, for those that don't know you, Nico, do you want to talk a little bit about you, like your background and your university experience?
Well, yeah, my name is Nico. I'm 23 years old. I'm currently living in Germany, or I'm almost living my whole life here in Germany, and I studied aviation management in Worms. It's a city close to Frankfurt, and basically in the south of Frankfurt. And I also did my flight training there. So I'm also a commercial pilot. I finished my CPL in the last year. Yeah, at the moment I'm looking for a job, and in the last months I also finished my dissertation in aviation management, and I also have a Bachelor of Science in aviation management. And yeah, I'm really happy that I really took the plan B with my university degree, as it's just giving me more options in this world. And as we have the pandemic at the moment, I'm so glad that I really took this way, because it also gave me the opportunity to work in a non-aviation job in the IT sector. And yeah, I'm really looking forward what the future will bring to me. And I really hope that I will get back into aviation in some months, a year, but I will definitely get back to aviation soon.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people are benefiting from doing a degree as well and just keeping that learning going. It's amazing. Like your obviously aviation management, you must have learned quite a lot. What made you look into state aid for airlines for your dissertation?
Well, actually, it's interesting because my bachelor thesis, I planned on other topics than I was already I already decided on topic, but then this topic was gone. And so I was talking with my professor, which topics I would have available. And I was really open to that because I didn't really have a clue what to write about. And then he said, yeah, let's write about state aid. And the most interesting thing about that is it was even before the pandemic, we decided on this topic. And then the pandemic came, and it was just kind of jackpot for me because it gave so much recent material. And also this topic became so important, much more important, because before we had every year like one or two state aid cases, and now we had like so many state cases with the really big airlines with huge sums of money. So yeah, I kind of got into this topic, and I'm kind of fascinated about it because I learned a lot. I started with this topic and every day reading into the regulations and frameworks, also in the case files. I was always amazed how much more state it is about. And it's not just like giving money to a company. There's so many implications on that, like in social, ecological, economical. And yeah, the most important thing about state is it's always about protecting in Europe, for example, it's like protecting the domestic market. It's not about the company. It's really about doing the best for the market.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people, when you talk about sustainability, automatically think of climate change and protecting the planet, but sustainability is much broader than that. There's the people element as well, and there's obviously the economic side of things. And I think that's where state aid comes in terms of that social element as well, because of course so many people rely on aviation, from a connectivity point of view and also from their own welfare. I mean, aviation employs so many people globally. Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. So you talked a little bit in your thesis about like the proneness for aviation sector to be in a situation where they require some sort of bailout from the government. And of course, like we're all aware, especially with COVID, about how susceptible airlines are for, fluctuations in the market. And, it's very common for people to call aviation quite a cyclical market. Could you tell us a little bit more about that and what you found?
Well, there are many different external factors, and the main thing is we just see now with COVID is with travel restrictions. The whole industry is relying on the open borders and on traffic rights. And just for example, at the moment, if I'm not allowed to travel as a private person to the US, that's a really big issue for the airlines, because airlines have to rely on the demand for travel. Also like with 9/11, for example, it was a big hit to the aviation industry. It's not comparable to COVID-19. It's like the biggest crisis that the aviation industry has seen in over 100 years of history. There's like, if you see some numbers, it's like it looks so small, the impact. But still, like why airlines are so prone for crisis? It's you have to imagine like only 30 airlines in the world. There was a IATA statistic about it, are really profitable. The rest is maybe slightly profitable, or so like they're bouncing around, having like zero profit, and then a lot of airlines who don't even make money. And I think we all know some examples of that. Like we had Alitalia in the last years, which was not making profit for years, for decades. Also, we had the example of Air Berlin. There's so many examples. That what I found, and I didn't even know, but it's like also with the cyclical nature of the aviation, it's that aviation is all about looking into the future. And as we all know, also COVID-19 just hit out of nowhere. We don't know what the future will be like in 5 years, but airlines are, for example, buying airplanes, ordering airplanes, and they will be delivered in 5 years, but it just can make a lookout. They can say, okay, our airline will be at this and this point, the market will have this demand, but you have no guarantee for that. And this is like the problem for aviation is you have to invest a lot of money just to get into aviation. It's not like you're starting, I don't know, a little business where you maybe need an office, for example. But in aviation, you need airplanes, you need maintenance, you need a crew, and you have such high sunk costs just to get into this. So it's like also the entry barriers into this industry, you can call it, they're really, really high. And so for many airlines, it's like a problem. If they get a plane delivered, for example, they could decide, okay, we're not taking the airplane. But the problem is the penalty fees are so high that it's kind of cheaper to take the airplane instead of not take it. I think there was some case some years ago from Air Austral from France, I think, or this they were not taking delivery of a 777, and they had to pay penalty fees, which were I don't know the numbers actually, but like I would just say a number like 50% of the value of the aircraft. And so they paid just 100 million or 150 million just for nothing because they didn't take delivery of the airplane.
Wow. Yeah.
And so the airplanes operate the airplanes. They operate the airplanes over, they might not take money, but it's a bet. Maybe they say in the future, we had like 3 years ago, the aviation industry was booming. Really, there was so much demand, and that's when they had the airplanes. Because also the other thing is, if we, I will also come to this later, maybe connection to some cases. But the thing is, if the aviation industry is picking up and it's not over like 5 years, sometimes it's just like in 1 or 2 years, the airlines wouldn't even stand a chance to get aircraft, or the aircraft would be so expensive in these times because everybody needs aircraft. For example, when we had the issues with the 737 MAX, for example, the market for used Boeing 737 was empty. There were even, I think, Nolinor Airlines from Canada, they were able to lease out their 737-200s. You have to imagine 737-200, like more than 30 years old, and the rates were so high, they made so much money with that. And so that's like what the airlines also have to consider. Like, okay, do I keep an airplane over the time of over like low demand, and I'm kind of not making profit with it, but then when the demand is hitting and coming in again, then we have the chance to make money with airplane. Because the other way around, it's also really difficult to sell an airplane during a crisis, for example, because who wants an airplane? Because like times of low demand are not just hitting like one airline, it's hitting the whole industry. So it's in a financial perspective, it's a really difficult industry.
Yeah, so you've got like the market is really sort of capital intensive, and forecasting is really difficult. But then, of course, prices fluctuate so much with demand, so it's like layered issues on top of each other. It's like, which makes it really, really complicated, and it must be very difficult for people to stay realistic to their forecasts. So if you're looking out 5 years in the future, anything can happen in the market in that time. So it must be very challenging for airlines to do that. So is this why airlines are in the position that they're in at the moment, where they're requiring some sort of assistance from governments? Is it to sort of ease that the lumpiness in their financials?
Yeah, that's one. I think that's one issue, and then also we have like the political issues. We have these cases like in the Middle East with Qatar, for example, when the airspace was blocked. Also, but there's also different problem. Like for the airlines, is they have such high, as I said before, like the costs are really high, but they have such high fixed costs, and especially like this full service carriers like Air France or Lufthansa. They have, for example, Lufthansa said they lost 1 million euros per hour in the beginning of COVID-19 pandemic. And it's just a massive amount of money, 1 million euros per hour. And they were happy that they could say, yeah, now we are losing 1 million euros in 2 hours. And there was a really big step forward to them. And so what I want to say with this is an airline has big overhead operating costs, and these completely independent from if you're flying or not. Still, you can adjust some costs, but you have to maintain your airplanes. You have to pay your lease rates or your financing. You have to pay your pilots. You have to pay for maintenance. You have to also abide to your contracts. For example, if you have fuel hedging agreements, if you have contracts, that's everything, or that's something which has to be paid, no matter what you're flying. And that's the biggest issue for the airlines. Low-cost carriers are a bit better in this situation. There was also some statistic, for example, they said Wizz Air would be able to survive like 2 years without flying because they have such big reserves. And also the costs are so low. Because also like Ryanair there was like a beginning of the pandemic. Maybe my numbers would be wrong by now, but they were also saying like, okay, we can survive at least a year without any substantial flying. And some other carriers, like the full network carriers, they would be like, well, maybe they can survive 3 months, and then they would go bankrupt. So yeah, that's the biggest issue now with the COVID-19 pandemic. That's why the airlines need government bailout. because otherwise they just run out of money.
So what would you say is, it's really interesting to hear that some airlines tend to fare better, and especially companies like Wizz Air that are relatively new to market compared to Lufthansa. What's different in their operating model that makes them less susceptible to falling foul of these sort of adverse market conditions?
Okay, we like the main difference is Wizz Air, for example, is a low-cost carrier, and Lufthansa is a full service network carrier. So the business models are completely different. I think many of you already have flown with low-cost carrier and also full service network carriers, and you see the difference in the booking process, in the quality of service, and quality of onboard products, and so there's a big difference. Also, for example, in the salaries of the crews, for example. A Lufthansa captain, for example, with the old contracts, a Lufthansa captain earned 250,000 euros basic salary, and at Ryanair, I don't have the number, but I would say for a captain, it's like, I just say around maybe below 100,000 euros per year. So there's a big difference, and the differences are also in the fleet composition. They also have like a much lower break-even point. So that's also a really big benefit for a low-cost carrier. They don't need so many passengers to break even. I think I didn't send you a picture. I could look for it, or I will maybe I'll look for it later. It's like comparing the cost of a low-cost carrier and the cost of a full service carrier, and the difference is like a full service carrier has like 8 cents per kilometer. 8-cent cost of available seat kilometer, and a low-cost carrier has like around 4 cents of cost per available seat kilometers. Then you can just see the huge differences in the costs of the carriers.
Yeah, absolutely. So they're a little bit more resilient in situations like COVID. I mean, obviously, COVID has been terrible, and every airline has been affected. But in terms of their level of support needed or external intervention, they've fared better, the low-cost carrier model.
Yeah, I would say as a low-cost carrier, you were pretty fine in this during this crisis. Also, another advantage is also always depends on the business models. But our big carriers like British Airways, Lufthansa, Air France, they make a lot of their revenue or their profit on the long haul. And as we have these travel restrictions, the market is almost not existent at the moment for long haul. Mm-hmm. So they still have to maintain their long haul fleets, but they don't earn any money. Like all airlines are phasing out their A380s because they see no future for this aircraft. And I think they made a huge loss with these kind of aircraft. And at Ryanair, for example, they were able maybe to fly a bit in the summer. Also at the moment, they are like even maybe it's small opportunities, but they can fly, and maybe in a larger extent than the full service carrier with the whole long haul operations.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So if an airline is in a position where they want to apply for state aid, what's the kind of criteria that some of the governments would look for before they would grant it?
So they're like this. There's a framework for the state aid. So there are many criteria. So the first thing they are looking into is what is kind of the market position of the airline. That's a really important thing. Like a Lufthansa, it was like evident that Lufthansa is an essential airline or airline group, because we have the Lufthansa group. We just not have the Lufthansa itself. We have Lufthansa CityLine, we have the Austrian, we have the Swiss, we have Air Dolomiti, Edelweiss, and other airlines. So that's like most important thing. They say, okay, the airline is bringing an essential service. And as I said before, you can't replace easily such essential service. Also, if you have the money, it takes a long time to replace like a full service network here. It's almost, I don't know, maybe it's even impossible to just say, okay, we replace Lufthansa with a new airline, because also there's a really big value of the brand. But then there are other things the governments are looking into. It's, for example, they have this in the state aid regulations that's also written, the one time, last time principle. So it says an airline is only allowed to receive state aid if they haven't received state aid in the 10 years before, or in the period of 10 years. Because the reasoning behind that is there are still some exceptions. For example, with COVID-19, it was an exception because it was like completely unpredictable situation. But the reason behind this regulation is they say if an airline, for example, is in the need of state aid, like 5 years later, it just says they didn't learn from it, or they didn't take the appropriate measures to be profitable again. And that's also like on the agenda of the for the state. For example, what they're looking into is like, for example, you have like two kinds of aid. One is like the restructuring aid, and the other one is the rescue aid. Rescue aid is, for example, for times where a company just needs money. For example, when we had this, when Thomas Cook went bankrupt, and Thomas Cook owned the German Condor Airlines. Problem was, Condor was a profitable company, and they just were in a really, really bad situation because Thomas Cook disappeared. So they were kind of taken down by that, and that was the reason why they, in the end, received state aid or rescue aid, just to have money to cover the cost, at least for some time, to also restructure. Also, there's sometimes also like a connection between rescue aid and restructuring aid, because sometimes in the beginning is the rescue aid, and if they can see this rescue aid is not solving the problem, then they have to restructure the airline, and so that's then also rescue aid. And well, there's so many implications. I just say things now out of my head. Then you also have this, they look, what I also say, like, okay, what will happen with the market, for example, if this airline is disappearing? Because they say the market, we have the domestic market, and they really look into it, because they say, okay, in our market, how our markets are working, the best companies are surviving. And so what they are also really looking into it, would we support a company which is not able to survive in the market? If we save it, it would, like, in the next 2 years, it would go bankrupt anyway, because they are not innovative enough, or the competitors that have much better costs. There's so many reasons for that, but they say we can't distort the competition in this way if we keep a company in the market which shouldn't be there. So it's what I also looking into.
So rescue aid is kind of like a very sort of short-term, superficial, you need help because of a certain situation, we're going to put a plaster on this, let's have some money and tide you over and help you get out of it. Whereas restructure aid is something where there's something more fundamental going on with the airline. They need to change the way they operate, otherwise they won't be able to survive. So it's some money to give them to be able to restructure and able to continue. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say that's like perfectly described. It's rescue aid is like the plaster. It's for the situations when there's just some problem. There's so many external factors. I think we all, if we just like watched what was going on in the last 20 years in the world, maybe there's a volcano breaking out in Iceland, for example, or COVID-19 is happening, or the economic crisis. So there are so many options for that, and the rescue aid is also limited to like 6 months. And this rescue aid is, for example, also, yeah, it was, for example, for Air Berlin. Now I'm already like getting into a case. Air Berlin back in the days was owned, or one of the owners was Etihad. And then in 2017, Etihad just pulled their financial support for Air Berlin. And then Air Berlin was, beginning of the summer, they just would have been bankrupt, or they couldn't even say maybe the like a negative example was like back in the days, Swiss Air. As far as I can recall, Swiss Air, I don't know the exact date, but it was like they just went bankrupt from one day to another. They went bankrupt and all planes were grounded. And that's because if an airline is going bankrupt, they also pull their AOC, so the air operating certificate. And so in the case of Air Berlin, for example, the German government and also the European Commission was agreeing on that, because the European Commission, like the governments of the countries, are notifying to the European Commission, and the European Commission is then looking through it and saying yes or no, or saying, okay, you have to change it there. But in the end, for example, for Air Berlin, they received 150 million loan, and the sole purpose of this loan was to cover like the summer months, because like from July to September, we really have peak travel time in Germany. And it would have been catastrophic if Air Berlin just would have gone bankrupt, because like so many million of passengers would have lost their tickets. My sister, for example, lost her ticket with Air Berlin because they canceled their flights at some moment. But it was a really difficult situation. It's also was the same with Condor, because if you say, okay, this airline is going bankrupt, then it might, maybe the whole long haul network is gone, and it's kind of an essential service because people have booked their holidays. They're already abroad. They are like sitting in Cancun, for example, and then I don't know, they just see the news at the hotel bar, and your airline's bankrupt, and they're like, oh, how do I get back now? And it's like what the German government also wants to avoid is this just having like some million passengers stranded. And also they wanted that the people had the chance to vote in Germany, because we had elections and end of September 2017, and said it wouldn't, they can't, don't want to be responsible for taking away the right to vote. And also there are so many implications in that. I could talk like for 1 hour about this case, but to make sure, like also the social effects were included there. So that's also what they're looking into, because if you if a company is just going bankrupt, you don't know what will happen. But if you're like this 3 months with Air Berlin was able to sell the company or parts of the company in a proper manner. So Lufthansa was taking up some parts, then Niki Lauda was buying back like the Niki, then EasyJet was also buying some slots, and I think also aircraft in Berlin, for example, and also for the all employees of the company. It was saving them, because if you have a like unstructured bankruptcy, maybe their pension would have gone. So everything they worked for just would have gone. And so they just gave the people also a chance to look for new jobs and be not just on their own, like getting a call, we are bankrupt, so look where you go.
Yeah, I think it's, I can definitely understand the social side of things. In terms of like when these situations happen, there's usually some degree of backlash in the media. And I don't want to get too far down the political debate lines of like capitalism or anything with this, but I think, you know, a lot of people feel, or there's a lot of people feel that there's a perception of why should governments bail them out? Why should taxpayers' money go to helping an airline? That, you know, there should be some accountability potentially for the executives in charge of the airline to make sure that their airline is in a bit more financially resilient place, and that the government shouldn't have to come in and, you know, swoop in and rescue them. Did you look at that at all in your thesis? And what would you say that some of those criticisms are potentially valid, or would you say that some of them are, you know, it's potentially a few myths that's leading to that kind of view?
Well, this question is really good, because my personal perception is that a lot of people might think, I don't judge for that, I was also like a beginner or didn't even have a lot of knowledge about this topics of state aid. But basically, like, state aid is mostly a loan, or the government, for example, is buying into a company. So for example, the loan for Lufthansa, the German government bought like 20% of the shares of the Lufthansa, and then they also placed a bond on Lufthansa, or bought with the bond. They also had the right to convert it to their ownership to 25% plus one share, because it's like for some German law, because they wanted also to avoid that the company, for example, could be bought from an outside investor, because the German government now has a veto right in case of some takeover move from some investors, because we all know like a big investment firm could easily buy a Lufthansa, because many airlines are not worth a lot at the moment. But yeah, to just with this criticism, it's a difficult, really difficult topic. In the last months I read a lot about the cases. Basically, I would say it also, we all know, like, I don't want to get into deep with this with media. Sometimes it's not the whole information. Like, for example, as I said, like, state aid is can be understood as a loan, and there are also like incentives for every airline to pay back this loan in a really fast, because there are so many implications also for that. For example, Lufthansa had to give up slots in return for the state aid, or other airlines have the same. So it's not just like they're giving money or giving a loan. They also have really to give something for that, to give up slots. Or also, if you're under state aid, for example, that's why Lufthansa really is trying to pay back this really fast. They issued a bond, I think beginning of this year. They issued something to raise 1 billion euros, just to pay back like a part of the state aid, because they try to pay back all the state aid, because then they're free again in their decision making, because now the government still has a say into that. And that's I think really important to know about state aid. It's not a free ride on the cost of the taxpayers, not at all. They and if for example, also there are cases, for example, Marlev. Marlev was given money by the government, and then it was Wizz Air in an anonymous party. They appealed the complaint to the European Commission, and that's in every company. Everybody's allowed to complain, to hand in a complaint to the European Commission and say, okay, we have our doubts that this is lawfully. And they investigated in Marlev, and they found out that, for example, Marlev did nothing to reduce the distortion of competition, because state aid is always coming with some distortion of the competition, because it's affecting the market. And normally,
Yeah, for somebody that doesn't know what like distortion of the market or the competition means, could you just explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. It's you have to imagine like we normally how our market is working with supply and demand, and all normally like all in the market are in a free competition. But what happens with state is, for example, we have some certain markets. For example, take Budapest, for example, with Malev. We had back in the days, I think we already have like Ryanair, Wizz Air, and other airlines. And now Malev is like getting money from the government, and now they have a advantage, and that's a distortion of competition, because this advantage is not given to everybody. It's just given to one party. So they were in a better position. And what normally with state aid, as I said, with Lufthansa, normally you have to sell some parts of the company, you have to give up slots, so you have to give something back to reduce all these effects. And the other thing was about with Malev, for example, there was no real plan, restructuring plan, which was followed. And also there was normally state aid should be limited to the absolute minimum. It should be just the amount of money which is required to cover a certain cost, or that's the amount of money which is needed to continue operation or to restructure an airline. But there was no limitation. It was just like, yeah, here you have, I think it was like 130 million euros all in all. And yeah, there was no restriction on Malev. So, and they also criticized, the problem was that Malev already received state aid before, and it was proven that they were not able to solve the problems, or they didn't solve the problems. They were maybe in the expectation, or they knew the government will give us additional money. We have the same with Alitalia. Alitalia is a really, really difficult case, where I don't have I have some knowledge, but it's so difficult. But getting back to Malev, for example, and then the European Commission said, okay, to the Hungarian government, this state aid was unlawfully for this stated reason, for no limitation of the distortion of competition, and no means of limiting the aid. And yeah, in the end, Malev had to pay back 130 million euros to the Hungarian government, and 130 million euros was also the whole revenue of the year 2010. And well, the consequence was that Malev went bankrupt in the end. And for me, that is a really good example that it's not a free ride for a company. It's really, it's just showing. It's just showing the European Commission is really having an eye on that. And we just maybe, it was in the German news that, for example, Lufthansa had some trouble with Condor, or they canceled a contract with them. But now the European Commission was saying, okay, you can't cancel the contract, because as long as you having stated there's some restriction to your business operations, because you can't like misuse the benefits you're having from state aid to affect other companies. It should help you, but you can't abuse your state aid to gain market share, for example.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. I think that it's good that those conditions are in place, and it's good that it's not the money isn't given freely. It comes at a cost to the company as well. Whether it's like freedom in terms of they have a share with the government, or it's tricky. So it's not done, just I've got myself into trouble, please can I have some money? It's a big undertaking asking them for state aid from what you've said. I was really interested in a particular part within the conclusion of your thesis about a potential way of overcoming some of the complications, I guess, and what I thought from it, and I'd love some more information on, is, it gets quite complicated, doesn't it, when you've got an airline that's, say, based, where I'm from, say in the UK, but their owners are actually overseas, and therefore, if the UK government gives the state aid to that airline, we'll technically say it's, in the likes of British Airways and IAG, they're actually giving money to a Spanish, entity. There is one way that you talk about in relation to like a law firm from Madrid came up with a potential solution.
It's, if I recall, the article was really like in kind of the beginning of the pandemic. I would have to look it up if there's anything coming into this direction. I think that's also not on the agenda at the moment, like to really change state aid law, because state aid law is like always reviewed and always looked into. But this approach actually, I really like this idea. It's the idea was saying, okay, we have the European market, and we have, for example, EasyJet, we have Ryanair, so we have operators, or like to explain, like in Europe, for example, you have different traffic rights, and as an airline, for example, that's what EasyJet, for example, is doing. They're flying from Basel, for example, then they're flying from Berlin, they're flying from different countries. And this approach is saying, okay, we take another approach. It says, okay, origin and destination approach. So they say like every route, for example, is seen as an old market. Just say, for example, EasyJet is flying from Berlin to Stockholm, for example. That would then be an old market. And so they say, okay, how much contribution is EasyJet giving to this market? How important is this market? And so EasyJet would receive money from Germany and Sweden, for example, because they also do a service to these countries. That's how I understood this approach. But I would say that's like a fair approach, because we are so interconnected in Europe. And why should a government, for example, bail out a company which is maybe like in the home country, of course, creating some jobs, but also in so many other countries creating jobs. But in the end, like the home country of the airline would have to pay for all of it.
Yeah.
And even if the state is like also supporting the jobs, for example, maybe we take Ryanair now, like for the Ryanair base in Vienna, for example, also would be the support there. Yeah, I'm really expecting that there will be some changes to state aid, because it also really depends on the government of the countries. Some are more conservative, some are more, let's say, like more liberal with state aid. We also see it like overseas. I don't know the state aid regulations there at all. But for example, there's a big difference between Canada and the US, for example, at the moment. Canadian airlines have received little to no state aid, as far as I know. And then on the other side, the airlines in the US have received a lot of money by the government. And I think it's important. I think it's important to support airlines, because airlines are creating jobs. They're providing a really important service also to the society. It's giving us the ability to travel all around the world, and also it's creating new opportunities. For myself, for example, every year I've flown to Brazil to visit my family, for example. So, and without an airline, or if airlines just would go bankrupt, now I would say in this crisis, it's not even about the market, for example. It's not the market which is failing, or the market can't regulate that. Because normally, if, like, for example, back to the example of Malev, in the base of Budapest, like some days later after Malev went bankrupt, Wizz Air has grown there, Ryanair has gone into this market. So the service of Malev disappeared, but the service, or the offer, it was still there. It was just another airline. Would expect that something is changing there, because this pandemic showed us it's not that easy how it was before, when we know like how to say, like the golden 70s, where we had like the big carriers, Air France, British Airways, and they were all like really nationalized. But now we have complete different business models in the market nowadays. If a company or if an airline is going bankrupt just for the sake of holding up like the free market, but it's my personal opinion. I say like free markets are okay, but we still need this social component, because capitalism, in its like purest form, would now destroy the whole travel industry. We wouldn't have, I think also British Airways would have gone bankrupt without government bailouts. Air France, Lufthansa, also there would have been maybe opportunities, but when this crisis is over, we just would have such a big hole in the market. And I think that's not something we want. It's not something we want to happen, because if the supply, a lot of supply is gone in the market, the prices will go up again. And that's also what we are, as a customer, we also don't want to have. We don't want to pay like 3,000 euros, 2,000 euros for a ticket to, I don't know, from London to New York. We want to pay like 600, 700 euros.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic points there. Yeah, I do tend to agree with what you say as well. Yeah, I think that's fantastic. It has been so good to speak to you today about state aid. I've learned a lot, and this is a topic that, well, I know we've spoken before, but this really fascinates me. Is there anything that you would like to add, sort of final thoughts?
Yeah, first of all, I'm really thankful to be here. It was fantastic to talk about it. It's just amazing, because I didn't even expect to talk about my thesis again, and also in this in this type of conversation. So I really enjoyed it, and I also hope the people who will watch this, listen to this, also learned something. And maybe I changed your mind a bit on stated, or you say, wow, I learned a lot here. I really hope that you learn something, because nobody of us is perfect. Nobody knows everything. So maybe the next time when someone is discussing with you about stated, or saying like, oh, the government is just giving the money, you can say, no, that's alone. There are limitations, there are restrictions. It's not that easy as it seems. It's not a free ride for an airline. It's something they don't really want. It's a state is really the last option companies trying or using, because the state is really, or the rules are really making sure that there is, the abuse is just avoided. Really, that abuse is not possible, because the restrictions on state aid will just, in the end, protect the market and do also in the end the best for the people. And just, I really want to add one thing, because Air France, for example, maybe you heard about it. The government said, okay, you get state aid, but we have ecological restrictions for you now. So they said, okay, it was like, okay, you have to cancel every route, which can also be done by TGV in 2.5 hours, or below 2.5 hours. And well, the consequence was Air France had to cancel 40% of their French network. And so state is really also helping the environment. State, it is having social benefits. I think in the end, it's helping us all. So yeah, we should be more positive also about the help the governments are giving us, because in the end, we love travel, we love flying. I also really hope that I will get in the cockpit in the next months, years. And yeah, I think it's our dream just to book the next vacation to, I don't know, Cancun, to New York, go to Dubai, go to Brazil, because we all love travel. And if we wouldn't have also governments which kind of support our industry with money. That's why we can kind of be happy about the existence of state aid, and that our industry, I think Joe is also a really big fan of the industry and loves the industry. And we all, like all people from aviation, I would hate it really to see so many airlines go bankrupt because of something they were not able to anticipate or do something against it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think aviation's got a big future, and I think once the effects of the pandemic are over, I think it's going to bounce back really hard. But at the same time, and that's what we're talking about in Sustainability Month, we need to be very aware of the impact of the industry on the climate, and it's good that actually the state aid is concerned with meeting those environmental targets and pushing the industry forward in that direction. And it's what we talked about with the 3 Ps. So I think actually this has been a fantastic interview, because it's looked at all 3 things: profit, planet, and people. And it's a fantastic topic. And thank you so much, Nico, for doing this with the Aviation Base. And I wish you all the best of luck with getting flying at some point in the near future. We'll keep our fingers crossed that opportunities start opening up for you soon.
Thanks a lot, really. Thanks a lot. It was a pleasure to be here and to talk about aviation. I could talk for hours, really. I could continue with that like for hours and hours. And I'm so happy. I'm so happy, really, that I was given the chance. I was like, when you gave me the chance, I was so excited, and I never have expected that. It was joining a talk on Clubhouse, and then in the end, wow, now I'm taking part here. It's just amazing. I'm so happy about it.
Yeah. We'll speak again sometime. Keep in touch, Nico. And
bye. We definitely will.
Watching.